I was looking for people that could light up a room. I knew if I was going to start a church, I needed people that could come in and create an atmosphere of excitement, positivity, galvanizing. And so that was the first thing. I would literally, when I evaluated a team member, I would write down from 1 to 5, how positive are they? How much energy do they bring? How much do I perceive that they can look at the glass half full?
Hi there. Welcome back to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Franklin, and this is a show where we help you learn and master the skills you need to grow your leadership effectiveness and enjoyment. And if you don't want to miss an episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell on YouTube or the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform to get notified as soon as I post a new session. Before we get started, I do want to mention that I have a brand new book. It's called The Christian Leader Blueprint. It is a solid model for leadership development to help you establish a better rhythm of life, to see yourself more clearly, to leverage your strengths, to build more productive relationships. And you can find links to that book on my website, or you can go to Amazon or wherever you buy books. But if you just want to sample it before you buy it, I have a free short guide of the Christian Leader Blueprint on my website. And I would love to give it to you as my gift. It's absolutely free. You can go to ryanfranklin.org and download it today. So don't delay. If you want to maximize your growth and effectiveness as a leader, hit pause on this podcast, pull over on the side of the road if you have to, go to ryanfranklin.org to get the Christian Leader Blueprint short guide for free, or you can find links to order the full version book. So without any further delay, let's get to our session. I'm excited today to have on the podcast a friend and a church planter, Pastor Joumeel Mclaurine. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about Joumeel. He is currently a church planter in the Detroit metro area. He and his wife, Vivian, they have 3 children and a 4th one on the way. And they moved to the Detroit area about 10 years ago. And they served as an assistant pastor for another church, or an assistant at another church. And then in 2018, they launched Ascend Church. And Joumeel has a BA in psychology. I love psychology, from the University of Indianapolis, where he actually played college football for 4 years. I want to ask you about that. And then he spent his early career out of college in the corporate world before the Lord called him to full-time ministry in 2017. And so, Joumeel, welcome to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.
Well, man, so honored to be here, Ryan. This podcast is actually impacted me. I started listening and kind of faithfully in January. Adam Shaw, Jason Staten, Stan Gleason, a couple of those ones at the beginning of this year, and it's just been part of my routine, and so thankful to be a part of it.
Well, thank you for saying that. That means a ton. So I'm really, before we get into our subject, I'm kind of interested to hear more about this football gig. College football, that's a big deal. So
man,
tell us about that. What position did you play?
I was a running back. Enjoyed my time, got my school paid for, and funny enough, a lot of what I think about team building, which, I know we may jump into today, was formulated going through the recruiting process, going through being part of, great teams that won, conference championships, and then other teams that didn't do well. A lot of my framework, if you will, for even how I lead our team today came from that experience. So I enjoy the game. Now I'm coaching my son's little league team. And we had a big win on Monday, and I'm excited about that. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it was a really, really fun leg in the journey.
That's awesome. And now you're able to coach. How old's your son?
He's 5. So
wow.
He's little. He's little, and there's a lot of tears when kids get their flag pulled, and a lot of tears. A lot of craziness, but it's fun.
I imagine that takes some strategic coaching to kind of herd the cats, right?
My greatest leadership feat of the year. I'll say that.
Much harder than church planting,
Oh,
huh?
oh yeah. We got absolutely beat down the first week, and we had to go in the lab and come back with some strategy and some coaching tools.
And I bet you have a high competitive nature, and that just hurt quite a bit.
Oh
You went
man.
you went straight to the lab, didn't you?
Oh, straight to the lab.
That's
My
awesome.
competitive edge pales in comparison to my 5-year-old son. We're praying for him. The Lord will deliver him from his competitive angst, but we have fun.
Wonder where he gets that from.
Exactly. Maybe in the bloodlines a little bit.
So we're here today, Joumeel, to talk about leadership. Obviously, and I know just from our casual conversations that you have a deep love for leadership,
Yeah.
and I'd love to know where that love came from. What draws you to the subject of leadership?
Yeah, the best answer I could give is that I value it because I'm a product of it. Um,
Mm,
I grew up in a really great church, and I was surrounded by quality leaders from every sector of the business world, from every spiritual gifting. My dad was a in-house evangelist, if you will. My dad was kind of that guy that was the church soul winner.
yeah,
So my home was full you know, of Bible studies and watching people be led to the Lord. And I actually got to see with my own young eyes somebody come in, and I remember the smell of cigarettes or whatever it was when we first met them. And then I got to watch them, be led to the Lord and see the fruit on their life. And I got to watch transformation
wow,
in real time. And people that became members of the board or people that became leaders in our church, I was there,
yeah,
playing my Game Boy in the corner during their first Bible study. And so seeing that transformation, whether it was my dad or my pastor, who I grew up in Columbus, Indiana. My pastor's name was Dan Mitchell growing up. And he had a way about him. He had a leadership presence about him. And, you just thought he was you thought he was the president when you were, a kid. And I just
yeah,
grew, I could give you 15 names off the top of my head. I could just of men and women that I looked up to as a 10-year
yeah.
old, as a 15-year-old that were quality leaders. And so that created an appetite. Experience creates appetites. And it created an appetite for me to see that replicated in my life and in my atmosphere, if you will. So I think that's probably the best way I could sum it up.
I love the broad view of leadership examples that you just made mention of in your life, starting with your dad. I
Mhm.
love the fact that you see that as such a high leadership task or energy, that your dad was leading people into discipleship, leading
Yeah.
people to closer to Jesus. It's an important thing. This leadership thing, principles, aspects of life, transcends into all areas of our life, whether we're leading our spouses or leading
Yes, sir.
kids or
Yes, sir.
leading on the football field, your
Yes,
5-year-old
sir.
team, or leading a church or a church
Yes, sir.
plant.
Yes, sir.
That's a there's a lot of areas that we could be leading, and it's really in essence is influence. And are you
Yes, sir.
influencing the environments that you're in?
Yes, sir.
Which we want to. I brought you on today because I want to talk leadership insights and get some insights from you, particularly in your world of church planning, the church plant setting.
Yes, sir.
And you're just a few years into that church plant. When did you start that church plant?
2018. So we're coming up on year 6.
Coming up on year 6.
Yes, sir.
And then you've also done it with a multicultural perspective in
Yes,
a
sir.
very diverse community.
Yes, sir.
And so just want to get some insights from you from that
Yeah, yeah.
perspective. And we'll start off with just kind of hearing a little bit of your backstory
Yes, sir.
and what inspired you to embark on the journey of starting a new church.
Yeah. Well, this is really special for me. I knew there would be a day where I'd get to share this story with somebody from your community, but I didn't know when or where. But I'm thankful it's here. Um, God birthed the heart for us planting the church in Alexandria. Um,
Really?
I was at Because of the Times in
Wow.
2016, and Brother Mangan, I didn't grow up around church planting. I grew up in a
Yeah.
good district, but it's not like I always grew up admiring that, or I didn't know any
Mhm.
church planters. And looking back, my dad had exposed me to, there were seeds planted that I probably didn't, understand, being around certain church plants and whatever. But I just did, that was not part of my aspiration. And I was at Because of the Times in 2016, and Brother Mangan stood up during one of those transition moments, and he said, "There are ancient mantles, or mantles from previous generations, that God wants to pour out on some young men in this room." And he said, "Lift up
Mm.
your hands right now and receive it." And Ryan, as soon as I lifted up my hands, it's one of the three times I've ever had anything like this happen in my life. The Lord spoke to me as clearly as an impression as you can have, and said, "Start a church in Royal Oak." I didn't know
Huh.
where that was at the time. I probably had been around it. It was in the area that I was in relatively. But
Yeah.
I just laid on the floor back in the back of that sanctuary and wept for, probably the rest of the evening, just under
Wow.
the burden of this area. And
Wow.
long story short, I went back and tell my pastor about it. And I honestly, I had a kind of good gig going. I was an assistant pastor. I had the gas card. I had a nice house. I was at a church that was strong, and I didn't have the lead responsibilities and wasn't aspiring to that.
Yeah.
So I went home, and I was kind of expecting him to talk me out of it. And I was happy for him to do that, because I had no desire previous to that moment to plant a church. And
It,
as I
it
told him,
wasn't
"Go
it
ahead."
wasn't tied to your identity or anything like that.
No, no,
And
it wasn't,
and
it had never crossed my mind.
yeah.
And I went back and sat down with my pastor at the time and began to tell him about what the Lord spoke to me. And he just starts weeping. And he said, "Joumeel, what you don't know is that Royal Oak is where C.C. Kirby and N.A. Urshan had planted a church in the 1950s." And he said that church shut down in 1955, and CC Kirby was our first superintendent in Michigan. I had no idea. And he said, we've been trying to get a church back there for 50, 60 years. And he said,
Wow.
I think this is the will of the Lord. And so we started moving forward, and it was crazy because we started getting calls as we announced it from people that were in their 80s, 90s. One gentleman, last name Boren, I think he was 97, called us crying, "Hey, I've been praying for 50 years for
Wow.
God to send somebody back in that city." And it really
Wow.
taught us, we're walking on the prayers of a previous generation, right? And so yeah, kind of cool connection. It was, again, not something very premeditated for me. I have friends that aspired to that their whole life, but I got a word from the Lord, and he gave me instruction, and then we jumped full fledged into it.
Yeah. Well, I know just from our conversations, our brief conversations, I know that you are in tuned with your giftings, with the things that you're strong in, and likely also the things that you're weak in. I love the way, though, that you've tied this into not just what you're good at,
Hmm.
you've tied this into calling.
Yeah,
And I would imagine, Joumeel, that there's probably been times where the pressure has been quite intense,
yeah,
and you have wanted to quit probably at times, I would guess, in the
yeah,
last 6 years.
yeah,
And yet a calling has fueled the energy and motivated you to keep moving forward. Would you
yeah,
say that that's the case?
yeah. It's a 12 stones moment, right? It's
Yeah.
something you look back and you go, yeah, I can't deny
Hmm.
that this is what God said. The God gave me a memorial to look back on. And
Yeah.
yeah, in the lowest days, and we've had some. We were only a few years old when the pandemic happened, and we got kicked out of our location, and I had to keep this, at the time, 2.5, 3-year-old church alive when we couldn't meet physically for 8 months here in Michigan. And
Wow.
there was some
Yeah.
really dark days. But and now we're, in a really great season. Our church is just growing tremendously. But on the mountains, in the valley moments, knowing you got a word from the Lord, it's just been an anchor for our
Yeah.
family. And I'm so thankful the Lord saw fit to lead us that way.
That's tremendous.
Yeah.
Well, moving forward on subjects here, I want to talk a little bit about team leadership.
Yes, sir.
That's a crucial role in the success of any organization. You have to rely on others if you're going to build a church, especially in the success of a new church. And you better develop a team. You better figure out how to
Yep.
develop a team. So, how do you prioritize and cultivate a first class team, even
Mm-hmm.
though this is a church plant
Mm-hmm.
situation with limited resources? You started out with limited people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you cultivate a first class team in that setting?
Well, you see that I start smiling when we talk about this because I genuinely think I'm surrounded by first class people. I
I
really
know
do.
you do. I know you do, and
Um,
that's
uh,
why that's why I'm asking this question.
yeah. I really do. It's funny. Probably a mutual friend of ours, missionary friend that's been with y'all, was preached for me a few weeks ago, and he said, I guess I could probably say his name now, Hunley, but he said to me, he said, "Man, I can't believe you haven't got poached yet." They're just quality, man. Lou Holtz said something that always stuck with me. He said, "I'm just a better coach when I got better players." And for me, again, going through the recruiting process, going back to the beginning of our conversation,
Yeah,
I remember at the college I went to, we got a new indoor practice facility and we got new jerseys, and there was a season that we kind of elevated our recruiting chips, if you will.
yeah,
And we went just from, there was only one change. We just kind of elevated our recruiting atmosphere, if you will. And we went from being kind of a bottom of the barrel in our conference to being the cream of the crop uh, over 1 year. And the difference was the
yeah,
players. We
yeah,
just, we got access to a different caliber of player. So it's always been a priority to me. And even when we started the process of planning the church, when I did decide and I heard from the Lord, we're going to do this, my first objective was to seek God about who was going to come with me. And it
yeah.
wasn't, I wasn't, all right, God, what do you want me to do? And I did pray that prayer, but I actually have a journal here in my office. I went to the Lord in prayer and fasting and I started writing names down. Right.
Yeah.
And I literally I just started writing names down, and I never called anybody unethically. I didn't start sending text and tagging people on Instagram, or I just started praying and,
You
and
didn't poach
asking.
anybody, huh?
No. Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm the most proud about. I can genuinely say there's not a single person that's on my team that was contacted before their pastor gave a blessing or any context like that.
I think I think people need to hear that. As simple as that sounds,
Yeah.
and as ethical as that sounds,
Yeah.
I think people need to hear that. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to the Lord and I started writing down names, and just, you know, Jonathan and David, their hearts were knit together. And I started praying like, Lord, there are people who I believe you can knit to my heart that could feel what I feel for the city.
Yes.
And I had
It
such a
can be a
clear,
calling. You don't
yeah.
have to poach people. It could be a calling
Oh,
for the
it could be a
assistant
guy.
pastor.
Yeah,
Could be a
exactly.
calling for the children's pastor.
Which that's a whole nother stream of thought that I feel strongly about. I think there's this mentality we have that a lot of times that, like, you got to be the lead guy to matter. And it's like, I think there's a lot of
Oh,
people that
don't
are
get me on a
past.
candy
Yeah,
stick.
exactly. I just think there's a lot of people that are pastoring or that could be assisting or could be
Yeah.
partnering and have so much more impact, but we've sometimes had this culture where, there's only one man in the show that's valued. And the bottom line is, if you look at any other context of success, that's not true. It's,
Yeah.
you have to be, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Joumeel, when I realized, because I thought I was going to go start a church as well. Years ago, I had identified and felt like it was the right thing. I was going to go to Dallas, Texas, to a suburb of Dallas and start a church. And about 2 years into planning that, or a year and a half into planning that, the Lord turned it off like a water faucet. And then I went through a journey of figuring out who I really was, and who the Lord had called me, what the Lord had called me to do. And I realized that I was not called to be a lead pastor. I fit best in an organizational style role where I'm not the lead man, where I don't have to do a lot of extroverted things, but I have a high leadership energy, and I have a high prudence, so I can lead people, and I can get things done.
Yeah.
And that's what a large organizational style church needs. And so when I gave myself permission to be who I was, I'm telling you, it was such an emotional release, emotional and spiritual release for me that just, it literally changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I just feel passionate about that, we have a little coffee shop we built here in the church that we're in now, and we call it the Better Together Coffee House, and the reality is, like, that was what I sold, when I did talk to some of these people, just like, hey, I think that you're good enough to do something on your own.
Yeah.
I think that you're good enough to be successful with or without me. But I just think that together we might be able to do something more special than we could apart. And so that was just my mentality. That's what
I love that.
Even in the, recruiting process, without the resource, like I wasn't just hiring staff. We had people sell their houses and come move here to help us start this church, and I didn't have anything to offer them in regards to paper. But my whole thing that I would tell them is, like, I don't have any paper to offer you, but I do have a great purpose. And there's a burden I have for this city, for this community. Let me paint the vision of what we could do together. And I have a inclination, and I would say that to him, I have an inclination that if our hearts are knit together, we could do something special. And to my shock and all, there were people that decided to do it. There were people that were just crazy enough like me to try it.
People are motivated for a cause. They're motivated for the kingdom of God. And if we paint a big enough and clear enough vision for people, that's enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't even have to be a promise of a position even.
No.
It's vision for what's down the road, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. If you're painting that picture of making a world kingdom impact in the world that the Lord has planted you in, it can motivate people in a significant way.
It can. And I love that leadership book, Good to Great, the Jim Collins book. Yeah. And one of the principles I love that he talks about is, when people choose the company based on a position, the problem is that can change, right?
Yeah.
My first kids director that started, now he's my welcome team leader and maintenance coordinator. Everybody, it's like musical chairs around here. Everybody's tried different position. And then Jim Collins said, even if they buy just into the vision, the problem is the vision can change. Our church now, where I'm sitting currently, we're on like a main street miracle. Like we're across the street from a McDonald's and a Nordstrom Rack. We're in I'll tell you how good the real estate we're sitting on. Chick-fil-A is trying to buy our building and turn it into a Chick-fil-A. And we rebuke that in Jesus' name.
That's good real estate right there.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever been against Chick-fil-A in my life. But
that feels kind of non-Christian, doesn't it, to be against Chick-fil-A?
It is, but I am wholeheartedly against them right
I
now
bet
in
you
this
are. I
particular
bet you
location.
are.
But here's the thing. This is in 6 years, we started the process 7 years ago, 6 years, 5, 6 years. This is our 10th location, I think, you know,
Hmm.
uh, our team has had to adjust to vision
Wow.
changes. Right. But I love that Jim Collins principle. He said, it can't just be about the position or the vision, because they can change. People have to choose where they're going to go because they love the people that they're working with, right? And that's where I
That's a great
use that
point.
Jonathan and David principle. I would tell them that. I said, listen, don't, the only reason that you come here and join this is because you believe that I'm the type of leader that you could trust your family with, and I'm the type of
Yeah.
person that you want to walk alongside. And I would tell them,
Yeah.
I feel that way about you. I want my kids to be around you, but you got to feel the same way about me. And if you have that feeling about me, then we could do this. And man, the people
That's
that have
good.
stuck and been a part of what we're building, and now, some of those people are joining are becoming part of our staff, and it's just so cool what's happening. I think 6 years in, I think we just had VBS 2 weeks ago. We had 40 kids under the age of 15 here for
My
VBS, and
goodness.
15 of those, Ryan, were kids of people on our original team. And when we first started the
Wow.
church, we only had two. And it's beautiful. So there's 15 kids that are just on that team that are now, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and 7, that
Yeah.
are living in the reality that we were in my living room praying about 7 years ago. And
That's
it's starting to get
phenomenal.
really fun. And
I love that.
and yeah, I'm thankful for it. So
So, so Jameel, I'm curious,
mhm.
back to your team.
Yeah.
What qualities were you looking for, and even as you move forward and grow and expand your
Yeah.
organization, what do you look for in team members that, like, when you see these things, it
Mhm.
tells you this is a quality member, or when you see the potential of certain things within a
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
what are you looking for?
Yeah. So I'm going to let you into my analytical side of my brain. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. I hate to even admit this out loud, but it's just the truth. I wrote down a matrix that I heard, a 4-part matrix of things to look for in a team member. And as I was praying and talking and conversing with team members, I would literally write it down in my computer and evaluate them on this metrics and
I'm
good.
I'm listening. I'm anxious
Yeah.
because I've got my pen ready. I'm writing these four
Yeah.
things.
So the first thing I was looking for it's positive potential personal production of the 4 words. And I was looking for, first is positive, fear of excitement, positivity, galvanizing. And so that was the first thing. I would literally, when I evaluated a team member, I would write down from 1 to 5, how positive are they? How much energy do they bring? How much do I perceive that they can look at the glass half full? I'm thinking about a guy now. His name's Clark at our church. When we were portable, he broke his wrist trying to set up. He slipped in some ice while we were rolling our carts in and out in the middle of it. We're in Michigan, and we had this big 24-foot trailer that we would set up church and roll things in for 2 hours every Sunday. He broke his wrist one Sunday, slipping on some ice. I got to church a little late that day. I think I was preaching somewhere else, and he's got a broken wrist, and he comes up to me and says, hey, we're gonna have great church today. My wrist is messed up, but it's gonna be all right. And it's like, and you need those kind of people, you
Yeah,
know. So
especially in a
positive.
church plant.
Oh, you need them because there's some cold, hard days that you're going to go through. Number 2 is potential. There's certain people on my team that I recruited that I didn't know had the goods at that point, but I knew that I saw something in them that could develop. And I would ask myself that question: hey, if this person reached their greatest potential, what kind of team member would they be? And we got people on our team right now. I won't tell a story for everyone, but there's one guy on my team right now that's one of the highest capacity givers, one of the most influential business leaders in our church. Um, he's, he's just A+ level. And when he got here, he didn't have a job. He didn't have a job, and if he hears this, he'll laugh. Nobody would have marked him at the time as the top student in the class, if you will. And yet I just saw something. I just believed in that guy. I just knew he had it.
Hmm.
And now, I think he owns like 4 houses. He's in it's just crazy what he's become. But I saw it before I saw it. Number 3 is personal. So positive potential, personal. There's just some people that I couldn't really quantify or qualify why I wanted to be around them, but just something about them. I just loved him. My
Hmm.
worship leader right now. Uh, I just, I remember he was at IBC. Hadn't met him yet, and I just loved him. I saw him from afar, and I loved his spirit. I remember. Go
I
ahead.
kind of get that feeling about you, Joumeel.
Oh, I love it, man.
I don't know you super well, but I just love you.
Yeah, and sometimes God does that, and I've learned not to ignore that.
Yeah.
When there's a spark, my administrator right now, she's my wife's pastor's daughter from Alaska. Okay. I met her when she was probably 14. And I told my wife when we were visiting Alaska, I told my wife, I said, I don't know what it is about that girl, but the hand of God is on her. And I remember weeping. It was like she was 14. And I remember being at their church, their little church in Anchorage, Alaska, and talking to my wife and just saying, I'm telling you, that girl's special and we got to keep
Yeah.
praying for her. And 9 years later, she moved across the country to come help us. And now she's my administrator, and God's using her so profoundly. And I've just learned not to pass over those moments where God gives you a burden for people. And lastly is just production value. So positive potential, personal production. Especially if you're going to plant a church, you just got to get it done people. You got to get some people that, just roll up. They don't complain, and they just, tread out the corn,
Yeah.
as Paul would say. And so I looked at those 4 principles, and that was really the matrix, if you will, that I utilized to evaluate. And here's the thing, Ryan, I would evaluate based on that, and I would qualify: is this person a 5-star, a 4-star, or a 3-star? Nick Saban goes after 5 stars differently than he goes after 2 stars. Sorry, I should have said Brian Kelly. I apologize.
Yeah, you're stirring up something here now. I
I'm
see.
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Wrong state, wrong college. My bad. But the reality is, there were some people. My assistant pastor, I'm telling you, I, after his pastor gave the blessing, and he was regretting to transition, like I, I would have gave the guy my car to get him here because he's a 5-star, and he's exactly what I thought he was. And and again, that sounds bad, but it's just true. There's some people that, I just knew they had it, and we were
Yeah.
going to do anything we could to get him here.
Yeah. So when you get them there, and when
Hmm.
you identify your 5-star, well, let's say you
Hmm.
have identified a 4-star,
Hmm.
and they're there. They're really tremendous. You see that they're positive.
Yeah.
Um, they're personal.
Hmm.
They like rolling their sleeves up and getting work
Hmm.
done, and they have a tremendous amount of potential, but they're not there yet.
Yeah.
How do you begin to empower someone like that and equip them
Yeah.
for effective ministry?
That's so good. I think about, Paul looking at Timothy and saying, stir up the gift that's within you, that was given to you by the laying on of
Mm-hmm.
my hands. And, God is not giving you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. You know, Paul said, there's something in you that I see, Timothy, so much so that I put my hands on you. And the Presbyterian, the brethren put their hands on you. And I think,
Yeah.
Ryan, there's something about um, somebody knowing you believe in them enough to put your hand on them. And discipleship it's a slow cooker. Discipleship
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen overnight. Leadership
Yeah.
development doesn't happen overnight. It's um, long hours of placing your hand of belief and love in somebody's life. After we get done today, there's a guy I'm meeting with today, actually, that's a medical. He's a medical student. now he's a resident. I apologize. And I'm just going to meet him at this coffee shop. And my whole goal is not to talk about his business world. He's great at that. He's excellent at it. But to tell
Mm-hmm.
him, hey man, I see that the hand of God is on you and you're anointed for this hospital that you're in right now. And God brought you here to be a light in that hospital. And I'm going to give him scriptures and words and encouragement to tell him and call out in him what I believe is on his life and in his life in ways that he doesn't see right now, because he's in the middle of the pressure cooker of being a resident, and he's working 8 hours a week, and everybody's got life pressure, kids and business and life, and to have somebody interrupt the flow of your craziness and say, but I believe God's got more for you. And here's what I see. And I believe, Ryan, that's what prophecy is, man. It's saying what God says, not what you see. And people need a prophetic word, because they're looking around their life and there's not always fruit on their life to tell them that they are becoming something. And to get a word, a prophetic word from somebody that says, let me tell you what I see God says about you. In a world that's the cancel culture world we're living in, right? The world that is so critical and so canceling and so negative, to break through that noise and speak life into somebody.
I love that.
I've been shocked at the fruit of just that one principle in the life of people around me.
So if I'm here, and I'm sure that you have some structure of things, you have some methods, maybe even some things in the back of your head, a 4-part, whatever, as you're developing somebody. However, the number one tool that you're using to develop people is your relationship, is what I'm hearing.
That's it. That the relationship.
Now, that's hard work, Joumeel.
Yeah, it is. It is. I would say this too, Ryan. I think it's the relationship. I think it's, but I also think it's leveraging whatever God's put in you. Like I'm not saying that I'm like a prophet or anything like that, but I feel a bit towards encouragement and, and prophecy in that way, being able to see greatness in people and call it out. So I leverage that gift in me towards the people I'm spending time with. I have other people in my life. I have a mentor of mine that is a teacher, and that's his primary gifting. And his whole laying hands on me as a mentor is very precept by precept teaching. And every time we talk on the phone, it's if you heard our conversation, it sounds like a oratory book. It sounds like an audible book or something. Right? It's like, all right, step 1, step 2, step 3. But that's what I need from him, right? And he's leveraging his gift to develop mine. And I would say that just to be more specific, maybe, Ryan, is like, it is relationship, but it's also, I've seen a lot of leaders, even in my world, that will get around the people that they want to invest in, and they don't leverage their gift. So they're prophetic in the platform, but then they get around you and they're just talking about, sports or whatever. And they don't leverage that same gift that impacts the masses in the individual conversation. And I just think in my world of church planning and kind of building people one-on-one, understanding the importance of, proximity and relationship, but also leveraging, your gift in that, hey, give me a word of prophecy, use your teaching gift in a coffee shop, out in the wild, if you will. That's part of how I develop too. I see development, I guess.
Yeah, I love I love even the analogy that, or the thought that you mentioned about your mentor having a different gift, because the reality of it is not everyone has a deep interpersonal sensitivity.
Yeah.
However, even if you don't, I have a naturally low compassion level, but the Spirit of God in me, and then my desire to do good things, positive things, generates that number 3 of your list, that personal side of things. I want to. I can't live in the ditch with my lack of compassion. I've got to
Hmm.
generate enough to interact with people so that I can bring my gifting to the table as well. And I love the way that you see value in a variety of giftings.
Yeah,
And it's not just
absolutely.
you got to be a people person. Maybe your gift is teaching. Maybe your gift
Yeah.
is administrating. Maybe your gift
Hmm.
is leadership. It's whatever your gift is, bring that to the table, and if we combine all of those giftings, we're going to make a complete team.
For
If
sure.
if we can keep our if we can be personal,
Yeah,
and we still have to, no matter what our giftings are, we still have to build productive relationships. That part 4 of the Christian Leader Blueprint, we have to build personal, we have to develop those relationships in order to be effective in leadership.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So a diversity of gifts, and that leads me to the next topic.
Yes, sir.
And we're I can't believe this amount of time has gone by, but I want to make sure that we hit this topic because it's
For
such an
sure.
important one, and that is diversity in
Yes, sir.
cultures in leadership. You bring diversity can bring a fresh perspective
Hmm.
and enrich sort of the overall effectiveness of a
Hmm.
team when you have a diversity. Yet it's not always easy to work
Yeah,
in a diverse, with lots of different cultures and I would assume in Detroit it's a wide range of cultures that come to the table. And here's the deal: you've got to minister to a wide range
yes,
of
sir.
people who have been raised in all different types of cultures.
Yeah,
So how do you intentionally foster a multicultural team in your church plant? You have a diverse team. So how do you do that?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
what benefits have you seen
Oh,
from embracing that
it,
diversity?
yeah, it's wonderful. I really do believe that diversity, multiculturalism, multi-generationalism, whatever you're doing, it has to be something not just that you do, but something that you are. Meaning, a lot of times
Yeah.
when we get in this conversation, the question, it's like, okay, what program can we roll out? What's the step by step? And the reality is, I think it's something that is much more of a becoming. It's much more of an identity than it is a. And I think there are practical things, but I think it's much more of a being. My wife is Hispanic. My parents are African American. My parents adopted. My younger adopted brother is white with blonde hair and blue eyes. When we walk in the door as a family, people are so perplexed. Like, what is going on with
I
that
love it.
crew? But I grew up in that environment. I grew up in that atmosphere.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think it's something that we have to pray and then embrace. My pastor that I grew up in under, he prayed 40 years ago. He always says, I had a white church, and he said I wanted a multicultural church, and I didn't know what to do. And he said, I just prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And he said, then I specifically prayed that God would give me a black leader, because he
Mm.
said, I knew that when minorities walked in our church, they didn't want to hear about our diversity program. They wanted to see who we are, and they couldn't see who we are if they couldn't see it,
Yeah.
right? And I needed a minority that was visible, that could partner with me, that they could just see this is who we are. And my parents moved to my hometown. My dad got a job there. He was an engineer, and my pastor just sat down with him and said, "Hey, I want you to be that couple." And my parents bought into
Wow.
it. And you fast forward, that church is incredibly diverse. And I actually said this to my church on Sunday. Our church is 5 years old, 6 years old, and we probably have 15 um, different nationalities. We have Filipino. Our
I
church is
love
still
that.
predominant. Our church, pastored by a black pastor, is still probably no, it's not probably. It's predominantly white, but it's got African Americans, tons of African Americans that have never gone to anything but a black church, tons of Caucasian people that have never gone to church with black people, Hispanics, but that's but that's just who we are. That's the church I was raised in. That's part of my
It,
identity. It's not a program. It's what we are. Does that make
well,
sense?
it's who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there had to have been some sort of intentionality.
Yes. Yes.
Even in building your leadership team, you had to have had that in the back of your mind, right? Or
Oh
did it
yeah,
just happen to you?
absolutely. And I'm going to use those two same things from my pastor, my home pastor:
Yeah,
pray and embrace. I prayed
gotcha.
for a certain. I knew I needed I knew that I needed a Caucasian leader to partner with me to
Hmm.
reach who I felt we need to reach in our community, and I prayed about it. Again, you reverse history, just like my home pastor prayed about it. I prayed about it and identified somebody that I felt like could be that. And then when we my assistant
That's
pastor actually,
intentional. That's very
yeah.
intentional.
And that's the thing.
I love it.
Do we even pray like pray specifically? If we pray anything according to His will, like, God, I need I need a minority leader, or
Hmm.
I need somebody who's visible. Help me to speak their language. Help them to understand where I'm coming from. Knit our hearts together. So, my assistant pastor, and you could call him assistant pastor, you can call him executive pastor. He's the man, and he runs this place. And I just come and kiss babies and preach. Seriously. But we grew up together. Him and his wife, beautiful family, Caucasian couple. When we started the church, Ryan, we did a video that said, it's not a black church. It's not a white church. Me and him did this together. I said, we said it's God's church, and it could be your church. And that video, that it's not a black church, not a white church video, I think got 150,000 views at the
My
time when we
goodness.
posted it, in like a matter of weeks. And we had hundreds of people that connected to our church from just that video, and the intentionality around, again, I prayed it, but then we embraced it, and
Yeah.
then we celebrated it and promoted it. And we still get people 5 years later that come in. We have a couple in our church right now that says, man, I saw that video 5 years ago and thought, man, in Detroit, which Detroit's one of the most segregated cities in the country, they said, man, we got to go try that church out. And I would say it's still the number one reason people try our church, is because they don't see
So,
a lot of churches that do what we do.
sounds like you may need to run another video like that.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, seriously, Ryan, we had a couple hundred people show up at our first service. We had about 300, I think it was 367 people showed up at our first service, which,
Wow.
that was just our launch. And then we knew it was going to kind of shrink from there. Our goal was to
Right.
land at 100, which is basically what happened. But we probably had, in the first month of our church, seriously, 100 people come to church and verify that they came because they saw that video. And so,
My
yeah, we were
goodness.
definitely intentional about it, but it started with an intentional prayer, and then an intentional embrace of the two represented minorities, our groups.
So, Jamil, you actively pray and be intentional
Hmm.
about recruiting a diverse
Yeah,
staff for your
yeah,
church.
yeah.
Now, it's all wonderful as you're doing that and as
Hmm.
it comes together, but as you continue through the months and years of
Yeah.
working together, you know, there's got to be some intentionality for inclusion
Hmm.
and to create a sense of belonging within your
Yeah.
team, because you have different views, you have different
Yeah.
backgrounds, you have different even personalities, that childhood of origins.
Hmm.
How are you intentional with, what's your strategy with that?
Yeah. My answer would be, it's all about culture. And when I say all about culture, we maximize our similarities and we minimize our differences. So the things that we are on the same page
Say
about,
that one more time.
we
You
maximize
maximize.
in our culture. And so in terms of, we magnify, maybe magnify is a better word. We magnify our similarities and we minimize our differences.
I love
So
that.
the things that we are on the same page about, we celebrate it. We make a big deal about it. We always say we want to be known for what we're for, not what we're against, right? So in the culture of our church and in the intentional language, you know, we talk about those things. This is who we are. This is what we're about, you know.
Yeah.
But then there's differences. You know, I have people in my church. Like I said, I have some African Americans in my church that have never gone to church with anybody that doesn't look like them, and maybe
Yeah.
have political views that are very opposite than um, a another person in our church that is whose pigmentation is a little lighter.
Yeah.
But in the controversial issues, I just don't magnify it in the pulpit. I'm not going to get up and preach a message that could be even accused of being politically charged, because
Yes.
I'm not a Republican preacher. I'm not a Democratic preacher. I'm a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it doesn't help me in my context to be or sound overly political or really, and we know what the triggers are. We know what the trigger buttons are. They're all over the news, right? And there's certain things that push the button on the left or push the button on the right. And it's not that I don't have my opinions. I'm just not going to magnify it,
Yeah.
because there's somebody in the pew who sits a little differently than me, and they aren't going to be able to hear the message of Jesus through the noise of my political preference.
Hmm.
And I don't have to
Wow.
say the phrase Republican or Democrat to be able to communicate or to exude, right, certain cultural values that can press those buttons. So we just minimize it.
Yeah.
And it's funny. This a cool contextual story the other day. I had a lady in our church that comes, I'll say, from a very conservative background.
Hmm.
Um, you know, let's call it, would be into, freedom with guns, and just if you every conservative thing you could think of, she's the right and center of that. And then there was an African American in our church that came from a very, what we would call, liberal context. And I was talking to one of them because she's on our staff, and she said, I was like, yeah, what's going on? And she said, yeah, me and so, we all went to the gun range last night. And it was hilarious because that issue could have been a contentious issue, but across these different lines, this girl who came from a different background, they became friends enough that after years, they said, let's just go try this. But guess what? They didn't post it on Facebook and make it a political statement.
Yeah.
They just did it. And
They
they were
just
kind of
had fun
quiet.
together.
They just
Yeah.
had fun together. They were kind of quiet about it. And again, they didn't magnify it in case there was somebody that could be nervous about it. But also, that was something they were into. And I think that's a great
Yeah.
story to kind of
That is a
illustrate what
great
I
story.
mean, is that, if we're together on something, we're going to celebrate it. And if not, we're just not going to make a big deal out. We're just not going to post it on Facebook and egg people on, because
Right.
that's not the message we're trying to project.
Yeah. So you've built a diverse staff,
Mm-hmm.
and you've obviously, you have 15 different nationalities in your church.
Mm-hmm.
You're obviously reaching a diverse. I mean, your community is very diverse, but you're
Mm-hmm.
obviously reaching that diverse community. You're not just reaching African Americans or
Mm-hmm.
just reaching Caucasians or whatever. You, how do you involve your diverse team in reaching out to this diverse community and
Mm-hmm.
creating the connections? Is that a factor, or are you just
Yeah.
people reaching people?
Yeah. So I would say we're intentional about coaching and training for our context. So there is a context of how a Caucasian person in our church should maybe approach that new African American couple on certain conversations, right?
Hmm.
And I'll have that conversation with that Caucasian couple and say, hey, when you get to this topic, this is something to look out for. In the same
That's
way,
good.
vice versa.
That's
We're
good.
very intentional about that. Again, I'm not saying I'm going to preach that on Sunday and talk about that on Sunday in the same way, but in terms of developing our team, we have those conversations.
Yeah. So you're not
Exa-
afraid to have difficult conversations. Do you think that's made the difference in
oh, it
being able to
has.
reach it?
And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I had a couple that came into our church, very successful. The husband had 3 degrees, doctorate degree, all the stuff, very educated minority. And he made a connection with a Caucasian couple in our church, and they were going to go out to dinner. And
Yeah.
and and I knew that this Caucasian couple had never interacted with a minority couple like this, that had their particular context and culture and views. So I literally, like I said, I sat down and it was just a 10-15 minute conversation, one of our one-on-one meetings we have. And I said, hey, here's the difference and how, and I said this statement, and here, I think this is a good statement. I said, there's a difference between multiculturalism and multiracialism. And I said, all Black people aren't the same. And I
Yeah.
said that to him. And I said, your interactions with X person has nothing to do with the interaction with this person. And let me explain some of the nuance that's going on here and how you might want to approach this conversation a little bit differently.
Hmm.
And I think just having that culture where, again, we're not afraid to go there, but we're not going to magnify, the issues or the problems, has been very helpful. And then again, on like I did this last Sunday, we're doing our serve day this weekend, and I made a point to call all of our church up to beyond the borders of your comfortability type of ministry. And I was very pointed. I said, hey, there's some Caucasian people in this room that you think there's a wall that's too thick for you to go down to Detroit and help some of these kids that maybe look different than you. And I said, but 80% of those kids don't have fathers and don't have any adult males in their life that love them. I promise you, they don't care what color you are if you'll show up and help me serve this weekend. And I said that very
Wow.
pointed, magnifying, just kind of magnifying what we're about, right? And then
Yeah.
I told minorities, I said, hey, some of you African Americans in the room, you're intimidated to invest in a young Caucasian because you think they wouldn't respect you. I said, man, half these Caucasian kids in the world are looking up to every African American rapper and basketball player. And I said, what if God is creating an appetite in some of these young Caucasian kids to be led by African American in bad ways? So when you show up and you're a positive influence, they're already open to being led by somebody that looks like you, right?
It's a powerful
And
thought.
again, I'll share those kind of thoughts that that poke and prod at
Hmm.
at what are we going to magnify in our
Yeah.
culture. And I think that's been one of the most helpful things for us, is to be clear about our cultural distinctives around race.
Yeah. I hear when I hear you talking about all of this, I'm hearing normalizing. You're normalizing
Hmm.
the interaction of these
Hmm.
cultures
Hmm.
and making it okay to be yourself, yet
Yeah.
okay to even have hard conversations and
Yeah.
challenge people on things. And I think if you do that with it seems to be one of your greatest gifts is loving on people,
Hmm.
being personal with people. If you do that, if you challenge, you have hard conversations with love, with
Yeah.
compassion, with empathy, it makes a difference. And I mean, there is a little scripture that says love never fails.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we do this in love, it's not likely that we're going to fail. We're going to reach the community, the diverse community. Even in Alexandria, for instance, we have
Hmm.
a very, very diverse community right here in
Hmm.
Alexandria, and we've got to reach all shapes, sizes, colors, whatever.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say this, Ryan, like part of my heart around this conversation is very next generation oriented, because
Yeah.
I think the atmosphere you are developed in will shape your identity. Again, I grew up in an atmosphere that this stuff was normal to me, right?
Hmm.
So a
Hmm.
lot of these things are very natural to me. Like I don't have to have a 5-step plan. I grew up with, having one African American friend I played football with, and then my other buddy's a Caucasian kid that lives in a millionaire house. And I grew up being able to ambidextrously exist
Well,
in multiple environments.
yeah. Even in the
And
football world,
mhm,
you're working together as a team with all kinds.
exactly. And I think so. I think like so. People even in the community, we've had people ask us like, how are you doing this? And it's hard for me to explain it because I'm like, I've been doing this my whole life.
Yeah.
Like this is not, I'm not doing this is who I am,
Do you
right?
think there's the possibility that the Lord shaped you to go and reach this community by allowing you to have such a diversity within your
Oh,
home,
oh,
within the things that you were involved in? It's not coincidental that you were shaped to go and reach this community.
no, not at all. I really do believe that the Lord built me for this. And that's what I'm saying about the next
Yeah.
generation. It's like, what kind of atmosphere are we creating for our kids that
Yeah.
will allow them to solve these problems that we see in the world, not
Hmm.
with what they do, but with who they are?
Yeah.
Like, I took my son down to downtown Detroit this week to serve and help with some kids that, again, we have the same skin color but very different experiences. And my
Hmm.
son was intimidated in that environment. It was,
Wow.
there was there was fences and there was barbed wire, and it was a different environment. He doesn't live in that same environment, right?
Yeah.
But I took him down there, and I do things like that to shape it. It's just like sending our kids on a missions trip, right? But it's like I allow him, and I want him to be in different environments. And by the second couple hours in, the second day we were down there, his comfortability, it was like he acclimated to the atmosphere.
Desensitized. Yeah.
He desensitized to what was, and normalized. And it's like, I thank God that I was given the gift of certain environments that allow me to. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just like a fish in water. And that's what I'm hoping, in terms of next generation. A lot of my aspirations around this are, how can we create environments for the next generation where, again, they solve the
Yeah.
problems that we see in the world with who they are. They just
Yeah.
know how to speak the language. They've been around the different types of people, and they exude the
Yeah.
solutions. Um, that's my heart for it, man.
So before I give you my last question,
Hmm.
just out of curiosity, in a brief form, what's
Hmm.
next for you as a church planter? What's next for the future of you as a
Yeah,
church planter?
that's a great question, Ryan. Our word of the year this year is established.
Hmm.
Um, our church is crossing over into the season where everything that's next for us feels very beyond our pay grade.
It's,
Now
it's
we,
amazing. It's amazing how the Lord makes us uncomfortable at times, huh?
oh, yeah. Now we're not just hoping people show up. The room's packed. We've, we're about to launch a second service here in
Yeah.
October to make room for, to reach more people. And so what's next for our church and our context is shifting gears from, what I call the fun stage. I don't know if you've ever seen that book, Predictable Success, by Les McEwen. He talks
Mm-hmm.
about the stages of an organization and how you get to the point where your success supersedes your systems, and it's working, but then you have to slow down and rework the infrastructure and the systems to be able to deliver the same kind of care or product. In our case, for instance, when we were, you know 70 people, the level of care that you could give to everybody, even for my family personally, is different than when you're twice that, right?
Yeah.
So how can we rework the way we operate to be able to scale, care, personal ministry,
Yeah.
discipleship, development? So we're trying to slow down and rework the mechanics of our strategy and how we do ministry to be able to scale, to do it effectively for more people and operate more like an established church, if you will. Has to,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
I love that. You're wise in doing that.
Oh
So
man,
I always end my podcast interviews with a question.
yeah.
It can be related to our topic, but it doesn't have to be.
Hmm.
What's one thing that you wish you could tell your younger self?
Man, that's a good question. Um, I think my answer would be um, have hope for the future, but embrace your season.
Hmm.
Um, don't have an unrelenting hope for the future, but embrace your season. You know, Ryan, I think one of the biggest challenges for being a visionary type person, church planners are kind of crazy in that way. We all got one screw loose that's a little too visionary. We just believe we can go into some city and start something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you're able to perceive what's coming, but the hard part is being able to discern where you are in that continuum. Because if you're not embracing the season you're in, right, and
If you're not
content in the season you're
enjoying the moment,
and
even.
enjoying the moment,
Yeah.
you'll live frustrated or you'll live ambitious,
Yeah.
trying to bite off more than you can chew
Hmm.
at different junctures. And if I could go
Hmm.
back and talk to the younger version of me, I would say, hey, don't lose faith, because I've actually gone on both ends of the spectrum. I've gotten so content in my season that I'm like, I don't see but an inch in front of me, right? But I would say never lose that unrelenting hope for what God's going to do, but but don't forget to focus on the season and
Yeah.
focus on what's required in this season. And it's kind of like that old adage they say, you overestimate what you could do in a year, but you underestimate what you could accomplish in a lifetime of faithful ministry. And the more I get into this, Ryan, the more I'm looking long term. I just, even I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday and we were saying he's a church planner as well. And it was like, you know what? If we just keep the course and we're around in 10 years, you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that's going to work itself out naturally just by being sustainable in our
Yeah.
rhythms. And now my goals are more around health, more around rhythm, more around sustainability than they are around accomplishment or acclaim. So
Yeah.
that's probably
Yeah.
the best way I could put it.
I love that. That's a fantastic way to end, and some great advice for
Mhm.
the younger you.
Yeah.
Jameel, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Oh,
Thank you so much for giving me and our audience your time today. It's been such a privilege to have you on.
man, I'm so honored to be here, man. Like I said, I've admired you from afar, listened to this podcast, and it's ministered to me, and I really am so thankful to have been here today.
Thank you so much. So, if people want to connect with you in some way, maybe partner with you in some way, or just find you online, where would they
Yeah.
find you?
Uh, I'm not a big social media person, but I am planning to get better this fall. I have some goals this fall that I'm going to be engaging more. So Joumeel Mclaurine on Instagram, and then our church, Ascend Church MI on Instagram, and then same thing, our website. And if you want to follow
Okay.
our journey or be a part of anything, definitely connect with our church. It's they our team does a good job of keeping people updated.
Awesome. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes so people can find them easily.
Yeah.
So, this concludes our show today. And if you're a new listener, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to audio podcast or on YouTube. And also, it would just make my day if you would take a minute to rate the show and write a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. My name is Ryan Franklin. Thank you so much for joining us on the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.